Trade deadline's right around the corner. What should the Vikings do, or maybe not do? Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, where we're always trying to learn something new. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. Thank you so much to my hashtag everyday as you make this thing go around. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. So I'm glad that we have this little mini bite because we have a minute to talk about the upcoming trade deadline. So much argument. Should the Vikings be buyers? Should they be sellers? I don't really take that opinion seriously, but I figured this would be a great time to actually dedicate a whole show to what's out there, the rumors around those players, and possible targets that I think are realistic, some that are maybe less realistic, but interesting to dream about, and some ideas that I think are just like not very good at all. So to get a trade deadline deal done in the NFL, it's different than in the NBA, where I think the NBA trade deadline is this event, right? It might as well, it's like the first day of free agency for the NFL where so much stuff is swirling around. Things are going crazy. And it's, you know, I see all those headlines, and correct me if I'm wrong, people who follow basketball more closely than I do. But it seems to me like in the NBA, the trade deadline is this like inflection point where you're a little later in the season than it is for the NFL, where teams really have to kind of put up or shut up and decide, okay, are we really going for this, or are we, second to last in our conference and maybe we should start, getting a head start on stuff we're doing this offseason? And I think a lot of those deals that get done in the NBA are sort of born of that, right? Well, we're going to start shedding salary. We're going to start doing this or that. So let's, get a head start on what we're doing there. And the season's over. In the NFL, you don't get that for a bunch of reasons. But for a big one is that it happens, halfway through the year. Teams can be 3-5 and still be like, well, we're only 2.5 games out of first, like they can be like absolutely in that world. There's also a huge difference, I think, in the competitive cultures of the NFL and the NBA. This is one of the things that drives me nuts about every time I hear about the NBA and honestly keeps me away from following it more closely, is that the idea of tanking is so much more accepted. And if you're a bad team and you don't sell a bunch of pieces at the deadline, oh, what are you doing? You're trying to stay competitive, you idiots. And I think that sucks for a professional sport, right? But there's also this practical idea. If you are, let's say, the New York Jets, right? Well, Ulbrich is his name, the interim head coach for the Jets. I mean, he's auditioning for a job, right? Somebody like Andrew Berry with the Browns. If Andrew Berry decides to enter another rebuild, I don't know if ownership is going to have the patience to let him be the one to helm it. I think the only way a guy like Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski, the only way those guys keep their jobs right now after this Deshaun Watson catastrophe is going to have to be to just find a way to dig out of their 2-6 hole and get to the playoffs. I think it just has to be that, or at least to show enough life where ownership doesn't decide. But if you go into rebuild mode and say, hey, just give me 3 more years, we'll get this ship righted, they're not letting you do that. If Jimmy Haslam decides he's going to be okay with a rebuild, he's getting somebody else to captain that. And so there's these sort of like internal, these like selfish motivations everybody has not to really do that. But that doesn't mean that pieces aren't going to be for sale, right? We've already seen DeAndre Hopkins get dealt. The Titans dealt a couple people. We've already seen a little bit of this. And there are definitely players that are rumored to be on the block. So here are some names that I think are interesting for the Vikings. And maybe the blockbuster here is Jaycee Horn from the Carolina Panthers. Jaycee Horn is one of the only bright spots on the whole Panthers. He's already, I'll go with, expressed displeasure about the direction of the Panthers. This, what I'm referring to here is a quote from earlier this month about the DJ Moore trade and how he said like that really deflated the locker room, which is the kind of information I don't know if you would volunteer if you were the happiest camper. But that sort of gets people thinking, well, the Panthers are bad. What if they sell pieces? What if they're willing to sell Jaycee Horn? There is a Substack by Matt Lombardo who covers the Panthers. I don't know the veracity of any Panthers reporters, so if I just cited somebody who's a total hack, I apologize. But for whatever he's worth, he is basically saying that, sources within the Carolina Panthers are at least open to the idea, saying, maybe he needs a fresh start to do better. He needs to get out of here, that kind of thing. It's bad in Carolina. And that means two things. One, that means that Jaycee Horn will be available at all. But two, that sort of stuff tends to lower the price, where you go, we know you're trying to get rid of everybody and you're bad. We're not going to give you everything you want, though. And you're going to kind of have to take our deal or leave it. And we know you can't leave it. That gives you that negotiating leverage. I don't know what the deal would look like because the Vikings don't have any mid-round picks. But if you do want to give up your first-round pick, which if you expect to make the playoffs, which the Vikings are heavily favored to, at least at FanDuel right now, and if you expect to make the playoffs, it's first round pick in the later parts for a second round pick in the upper parts. You're going down 10 spots, and that is actually maybe not even enough to get Jaycee Horn to go like first rounder for second round. You might have to give more up or get less back, first rounder for third round or something like that. So whatever the value ends up being, I'm not going to try to quantify the value of Jaycee Horn. He's got the rest of this year and then next year left on his rookie deal, and trade value gets so messed up in these like super fire sale-y situations that I'm not going to try to speculate on it. But there's a name to potentially watch if you want to look at like the blockbuster, which the Vikings are rumored to be trying to make a splash right now. Maybe that's the splash. Some other names that people have been sniffing around, according to Ian Rappaport and Tom Pelissero, who co-penned an article this weekend about the trade deadline. A lot of the stuff they talked about are like edges and wide receivers, and I don't think that's where the Vikings make their moves. But perhaps somebody like Brandon Scherff. The Jaguars are trying to get rid of some stuff. Brandon Scherff is, unfortunately, they will not get rid of much money. But if you could give them, a day 3 pick, they might do that because they're just in such hell right now. Also, Cam Robinson has garnered a little interest. A little bit more about that later. But with Scherff, no money travels almost. I think veteran minimum salary is all that travels, and it's already prorated because he's already played a bunch of games. The vast majority of his cap impact is in prorated bonus, which would stay with the Jaguars. So that would be something where it would be like the reverse Ezra Cleveland. And I think you'd only do that if your solution to losing Christian Darrisaw would be to kick somebody you've got at guard right now out to tackle, like moving Blake Brandel or Reisner played it in college. If you kick one of those guys out to tackle, but then you need to replace the depth that you lose there, like kicking, Reisner out, and then you got to promote Reisner, or kicking Brandel out, and then you got to promote Reisner, and now you need a Reisner replacement as a backup. Then it would be Scherff, and you paid a 7th for it because the Jags are in hell. That would be that kind of move. Elsewhere in the cornerback world, a couple of names that are interesting. Brandon Eccles was mentioned offhandedly in this article that mostly talked about Mike Williams, but that Brandon Eccles would be one of the only cornerbacks the Jets would be willing to part with. DJ Reed is also, he's on the last year of his deal and is anticipated to hit the free agent market. One reason to maybe not go super nuts on the cornerback market in the trade deadline is because the free agent market's actually going to be pretty good. So you can probably get at least a puncher's chance at a pretty sweet cornerback next off season without even giving up a draft pick. You can just wait for somebody like that or Lenore from San Francisco to hit the market. There's a lot of I think interesting opportunities to bolster that group in the long term. But what I like about the Jaycee Horn idea that I don't like as much about somebody like Eccles, or also Greg Newsome is maybe available from Cleveland, but he has a fully guaranteed $13 million salary in 2025 that you'd have to pick up. And I don't know if you're going to be very happy to do that, especially for a guy that might not even be your starter. But if you did want to go with Brandon Eccles, he probably would be more of a depth piece, and the Vikings don't have a need of depth at corner. They probably have a need for somebody that's going to be like more of a long-term solution, which is where I see Jaycee. Like if you have Jaycee Horn, like you're extending that dude, and now he's becomes your sort of solution to that free agency problem. If you want to move around little depth pieces for day 3 picks, though, it's all pretty low octane, and I'm never going to have that big an issue with it either way. There are a couple things that I do think I would maybe have an issue with, plus some stuff that's just like impossible. So that'll be next. Today's Locked On Vikings episode is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. If you are in charge of hiring, whether you run a small business that you're trying to expand or you're in charge of hiring for a bigger firm, then you probably have a whole lot of other stuff to worry about. If you work in like HR, hiring is not the only thing you do, right? It's just one of the things, and you can't spend all of your time going through a bajillion resumes. LinkedIn has a whole bunch of tools that can help you narrow that stuff down, but LinkedIn is also a great place to find that pool of candidates in the first place. Over 70% of LinkedIn users don't even bother visiting other job sites. They might not even be actively looking for a job, but the person who's perfect for your role might not be actively looking right now. LinkedIn is a way to find that person anyways and put it in front of them and see what happens. 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours on LinkedIn. So hire professionals like a professional. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Today's episode also brought to you by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is daily fantasy made easy. It has been my favorite way to keep an otherwise horrific primetime game entertaining. And you best believe Giants, Steelers tonight, I will be prize picking. I don't know what I'm going to do yet, but boy, I'm going to have some extra interests via PrizePicks. PrizePicks is where you pick 2 to 6 of your favorite players. You put them in a lineup and they can be anything. This weekend, I had one that was 3 tight ends, all to score touchdowns. And they all did, by the way. So thank you, PrizePicks, for the win there. It's whatever you think it has to be. You don't have to do a quarterback and 2 running backs and 2 receivers and a flex. Like, you don't have to do that, right? That flexibility, plus the idea that you can win up to 100 times your money depending on how many players you put in your lineup and how many of them you were right about when you picked whether they would do better or worse than your PrizePicks projection, makes PrizePicks the best place to play daily fantasy. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. Thanks again to my hashtag everydayers, those of you that come around and listen every single day. And if you want a little bit more Vikings content, you can go check out patreon.com/LukeBraunNFL. I've got a big one coming out on the defense that I'm going to work on pretty hard. I'm going to work for most of this week, I think, on it. So it'll come out later in the week on what's wrong with the defense. But if you want something to tide you over, go watch my video on Dallas Turner. It's like 35 minutes of Dallas Turner tape. If you want to wonder why, if you're wondering why he's not getting snap counts and how concerned we should be by the fact that he's not getting snaps, why don't we look at the snaps he has played and see if there's anything concerning? I think there's a pretty direct approach to that, which is what I did in that video. So go check it out. Here on Locked On Vikings, however, let's go over some ideas that are maybe possible, but not my favorite. And the first one is Cam Robinson from the Jaguars. I don't think the Vikings should solve their left tackle problem at the trade deadline at all, because this problem is temporary. Since the last time we talked, I did that little bonus podcast on Friday about the Darisaw thing. It has now come out that he has torn his ACL and his MCL. So this is the Hockenson injury. This is the same thing. Of course, every knee is different. Every injury is different. So it'll be 9 to 12 months from when he gets his surgery, but his surgery will probably be delayed. The way it worked with Hockenson is his MCL tear caused swelling, and that swelling meant that you couldn't operate until it went down, which took like a month. And so the surgery didn't happen until January. And now, by the way, he's back on the active roster, fully expected to go on Sunday night against the Colts. So a life for a life. But that is going to be, I think, a little bit like almost exactly 9 months from January, right? From the date of his surgery. So assuming Darisaw has the same sort of timeline, you're looking at like in jeopardy for the start of 2025, but you're not, the way we were looking at it with Hockenson is like there was a world where he misses the whole season. Like that was very much possible depending on how rehab went. Probably not that way with Darisaw because he suffered his earlier in the season, but we're not going to see him for a while. That said, this is not something that you necessarily want to trade a draft pick, which is 4 years of team control for a guy, to try to fix this issue unless you can somehow get a starter for a 7th round draft pick, which usually that's not what those get you. Brock Purdy's notwithstanding. It's just not like it's a long-term asset to solve a short-term problem. And like, I don't really think that that's going to be good business. You could try to do a small long-term asset for a big long-term problem. But again, that's pretty difficult to pull off. The other thing about Cam Robinson is he comes with a lot of financial trouble. Cam Robinson's deal comes right now with $16.2 million in base salary, prorated to whatever that is. It'll be like half-ish, a little bit more than half if you did it like today. And that's a hit that the Vikings currently cannot afford. They would have to do some other restructuring move to make that work. So you're like void-yearing someone and you're trading a draft pick to solve a problem that's going to affect you for 11 weeks of 11 games that count. Like it's not going to do much for you. It's not going to be worth that, right? Especially because the first round pick the Vikings have probably has to change hands and you have to get something back unless you think you can get Cam Robinson for like a 5th, which, actually now that I say that might be a little bit more reasonable. But again, you're still spending a draft pick and sort of torpedoing future flexibility. You're causing more long-term issues to solve a short-term issue. Not a big fan. The other one I'm not a huge fan of is the Vikings trading for like an old wide receiver. I've seen people suggest, I haven't seen any rumors about this or anything like that. It's just like an idea that a lot of people have that I don't really agree with, and you're going to hear about it. KJ Osborne and Adam Thielen. So KJ Osborne, very tradable piece from the Patriots. I wouldn't be super shocked to see him go somewhere. He's not getting a lot of work. He's been a lot better in Minnesota than he has been in New England. Things are dreadfully bad in New England. And they might even be looking for, like, I could see someone like Cam Robinson going there, where they could do that and then have him be like a part of their long-term future. You trade for Cam Robinson right now, you're not going to extend him. I could see the Patriots giving him like a 2 or 3 year extension to have at least some sort of semi-serious tackle for Drake May. Like I could see that kind of thing working out. I can't see the Vikings going there. As for KJ Osborne, it's just that I don't like where does Osborne rank on the Vikings depth chart right now? Is he going to be above Naylor with what Naylor has done this year as a wide receiver 3? I honestly don't think so. I think with the speed Naylor boasts, you'd rather have him on the field running clears than KJ Osborne. And he definitely doesn't go above Addison, right? So he's like, you're trading for like wide receiver 4. What's wrong with wide receiver 4? Like, okay, throw a 7th at a wide receiver 4, I guess, but I don't really care. You're probably just doing that for sentimental reasons, which is bad roster building principle. And I think it's sort of the same thing with Adam Thielen, who also carries some money over with his contract. If you decide to take him from Carolina, again, things in Carolina are weird. I'm sure they would be willing to, but there's been some expression out of the like Carolina rumor mill that's not really a piece that they want to get rid of. And so you'd have to like kind of pry him away. What would that cost? The money of it all. And again, where does Adam Thielen in his current state rank in this depth chart? I don't think he starts on the Vikings in his current state. He's still a fine receiver, but I don't think he actually gets on the field all that much. So like, what use is that actually? I'm not a big fan anyways of, especially like, with Thielen, I'm not a fan of the kind of like trade back for a retread thing too much, unless it's, you threw a 7th at it and who cares, and we all just get to go wear our jerseys again. Like I kind of like that as a fan, but like from a strategy perspective, I just don't see how it gets the Vikings ahead. It's certainly not a long-term issue, so you're still probably trading a long-term asset for a short-term one. Don't love that. But also, you have to remember that with both Osborne and Thielen, Kwesi himself specifically was like, nah, we don't want you back. They let him go. They let him walk. With Thielen, they actively released him and let him go take a 3-year deal with Carolina. And the whole deal with that was the Vikings wanted to give him a 1-year deal because they didn't trust that he wasn't going to get get old in the middle of a 3-year contract. Carolina said, "No, we're fine with that. Here's a 3-year deal." And Adam Thielen said, "Yeah, we'll take the 3-year deal. Yes, thank you very much." And the Vikings gave him, it was like that. We'll give you this pay cut, this 1-year deal, or you can go test the market. And Thielen said, "Bet you I can do better elsewhere." And he very much did. I don't see the Vikings going back on that now that they have added 2 wide receivers that they're fast and excited about. I just don't see them going there. And it's the same thing with Osborne. I don't know if there was even any correspondence between the Vikings and KJ Osborne on the way out. I would have to remember how things were reported back then. If you have any ideas or if you remember anything, please let me know. But I don't think that they were I think they looked at their room and said, "Yeah, we don't need him." And I don't know if they would look at that room and think very differently now this far into the season. Okay, there are a couple other of sort of pipe dream things that the Vikings maybe could do that probably just aren't doable. But shoot, let's daydream. What are you, my mom? You can't stop me. Today's Locked On Vikings episode is brought to you by Gametime, the best place to find last-minute tickets. Finally had my first experience at an actual game that I bought tickets for with Gametime. Had a fantastic experience. Got my tickets. I did not do the last-minute thing that they always want, but I'm sure I could have found a better price if I had the stones to do that. Or they like to curate, so if you just don't know what you want to do this Saturday night and you want to go browse Gametime to see if there's any cool ideas in your area, definitely do that. They will find you a deal. If you let them choose the seat, they'll get you a better deal than you otherwise would have. Or if you let them choose the event, they can get you an even better deal. That's kind of their whole thing. But it was really smooth. I got my email the day of with my tickets, transferred, worked on my phone. Everything went smooth. No issues at all. It was fantastic. So download the Gametime app, create an account, and you can use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Terms apply. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Game time. If this episode of the Locked On Vikings podcast were a rocket launch, we have officially gone above the clouds. We are now into fantastical realms that no human can actually exist in without the proper shielding. Let's get weird. What if the Vikings were just like Jeffrey Simmons? So this can't happen, according to Ian Rappaport and Tom Pelissero and a whole bunch of people, that essentially a bunch of teams have called the Titans about Jeffrey Simmons because the Titans traded away that linebacker to Seattle and then DeAndre Hopkins to the Chiefs. Because they've already been trading pieces, people are calling around about their other pieces. Maybe somebody like T.R. Tart is available, but not Jeffrey Simmons. They were like, nah, he's a core piece for us moving forward. I don't really know what the Titans' plan is. Listen to Locked On NFL for more on that on Wednesday. I've got problems. And my co-host there is Tyler Rowland, who does Locked On Titans. So I'm going to see what he says about that. But I don't know what their long-term plan is, but whatever it is, Jeffrey Simmons is a part of it, which is probably appropriate. He's very good. So he's on lock. Not going to happen. All right, we got to just hang up the phone on that one. Elsewhere in the defensive tackle market, which is where a lot of people want to go when it comes to, buying somebody at the deadline. And I get it, because one of the key, most glaring issues that we just saw on national TV on Thursday Night Football against the Rams was a million one-on-ones with our interior players, Bullard, Phillips, Jerry Tillery, just not winning against backup guards, practice squad call-ups. Dudes the Rams did not want to be starting, but had to be starting all year, and they couldn't win. That sucks, and getting an infusion of pass rush talent on the interior is something that I think I get why everybody wants that. The problem is I don't know what D tackles are out there and actually available for trade that are actually worth a damn. Your Jeffrey Simmonses are not available right now. Or you could look, if you want to look at the Jets, like Quinnen Williams. We just talked about the Jets, obviously, with Brandon Eccles. Their situation, 2-6, floundering, just lost to the Patriots, feeling really bad about that. Interim head coach, clearly in a dead season, even though this was supposed to be an all-in year for them. That's a very trade deadline-y place. But Quinnen Williams feels like he's going to be part of whatever they rebuild to. He's signed through 2027 for them. If you want to look for a trade deadline target, the guy with 4 years left on his contract is not the guy to look to for that. Not necessarily because it's impossible to trade that kind of contract. Sure, it's possible, but because that kind of tells you where they're at on him, right? They just re-signed him, and they re-signed him to a deal that clearly showed that they believed he was part of their future, not only with Aaron Rodgers, but beyond Aaron Rodgers. And I'm going to guess they still feel that way. So I don't see that being really possible at all. And then the last thing that I don't really see the Vikings doing much of in any significant way is selling at the deadline. I've seen some people say this, and I think it's just a panic from losing a couple games in 5 days and just sort of going crazy on that and saying, oh, they got to pack it in. Boy, we would be hearing more of it if the Bears didn't get Hail Married and then the Vikings were like on tiebreakers. Technically, they would have been on the third tiebreaker, last in the NFC North at 5-2, which would be very frustrating, but also, oh, they're last in the division. Let's go, blah, 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 get rid of everybody, tank and all that. I don't really respect you if you don't want to win games. If you're 5-2 and you feel like the season's over and so bad that you should not win games, I don't respect that take. I don't respect that opinion. And part of it too is if you're trying to get a draft position, Vikings have already won too many games for draft position. They could lose out and still be like 5th, and it's a bad quarterback year, so all the good players are going for 2nd, 3rd. So you're not getting like the blue chip best player in college just for losing a few games after a hot start. That's not going to happen. It's never going to happen. Stop trying to make fetch happen. But also, again, think about who's part of the long-term future of the Vikings, right? If you wanted to sell, if you disagreed with everything I just said and you're like, no, I still want to sell, that didn't convince me. Okay. So who do you sell, right? Is it Shaq Griffin? Is it Stephon Gilmore? And we're just giving like a Caleb Evans minutes all for the rest of the season. And that's going to be how we play defense. But I guess you don't care because you don't care about the season, right? But I better not hear any guff from you about it. But it would be somebody like that. But, players like Cashman, players like Grenard, these guys signed longer deals and they figure to be a part of this like run that the Vikings are trying to set up. The Vikings have treated their roster construction like the next 2 or 3 years is a Super Bowl window. And they did that with the expectation that they'd have a rookie quarterback during that, and that's J.J. McCarthy, and that they're going to do their thing. So if you're going to try to sell pieces at the deadline, clock's ticking on getting those things to actually, on getting that roster to work out. So if the Vikings do end up trading anyone away, it's somebody that they either have like a redundancy with, that they don't see as part of their future plans, but it also has to be somebody that doesn't leave a gaping hole that ruins this year. I could see in a different world, if the Vikings were 1-6, I could see them maybe dealing Cam Bynum. If they don't want to extend him, which they haven't extended him yet, maybe that conversation reopens after the season. But as it stands now, he's a pending free agent. So you would only be selling, 9 games of his service. He's a starting player. Somebody would have a position of need. You could probably get a reasonable draft pick from it. And if they were in a situation where they go, okay, the Sam Darnold year is clearly not working out, then they could get ahead on their offseason like all the NBA teams do, but not at 5-2, because who plays safety? You're not going to put Josh Metellus in that position. Right now, he's filling in for Blake Cashman. So you don't have that available to you. Is it like Theo Jackson time? How are we feeling about that? I don't know if they feel very good about that. They've shown that they'd rather have Kamu Grugier-Hill in. Somebody like Kamu, maybe somebody who's on, one of these veterans on 1-year deals. You could do like Aaron Jones or something like that, but I struggle to see the guy that they can like easily replace right now. I mean, they could withstand like an injury and the backup could come in, but I'm talking like rest of the year. The guy that could get removed from the Vikings for the rest of the year and the Vikings would be like, oh yeah, that's fine. Like, I don't really see that guy. So I don't know if I would necessarily get my hopes up for the Vikings striking some crazy blockbuster deal at the deadline. That's always easier said than done. But my jaw wouldn't hit the floor just because of the reporting around it has been that like the Vikings are trying. But trying is different than doing. So we'll see what happens. We got Twitter Tuesday tomorrow, so get your questions in. You can send them to me via Gmail at lockedonvikingspodcast@gmail.com. There's a Google form in the show notes you can fill out too if you prefer that, just in the description to any episode. And we'll follow back up on this defense thing later in the week. Probably that'll be the Wednesday episode, but I'll have a Patreon up about it as well as patreon.com/LukeBrownNFL. I'll see y'all tomorrow. And as always, Skol.